Well, I'm going to take a moment to introduce Clare properly so that everybody has a little sense of her. But once this is over, you will know Clare. Clare is a mystical planet walker, a Samara, a pollinator, a connector of ideas and people. She has been a sound healer and an energy worker for much of her life and explores the realms of the numinous and the tangible through her work as an artist. She swims in liminal spatial realms, teaches, and alchemizes consciousness. She understands energy from the human living system perspective and feels the emotions of life and the elements. All this shows up as performances and dynamic emergence and Clare. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Mark. Okay. So, one thing you can see in the four corners here is 4 different energy balls. And those are moments of capturing or witnessing, actually, I prefer that language, something going from the implicate to the explicate. In other words, if you're not so familiar with Bohm, the not yet visible, tangible, tactilely relationable into something that we can either see, feel, or hear. Intuition, of course, is the ability to feel these things before they come into form. And Chris, the reason I was really excited about what you were sharing is because one of the things I'm going to touch in on, I hope you can stick around, is this another perspective, an additional feeding into what you were talking about with linear values. Okay, so dynamic emergence has a proper formal definition, which I'll give you, but it's really just about life becoming. And it's about, for right now, it's about the human experience of being a living system and what that really means for us and how that affects our experience of being here in an interconnecting web of living and loving systems. So the actual technical definition is the phenomena of novelty arising when 2 or more elements meet. The phenomena of novelty arising when 2 or more elements meet. So as a musician and an artist and someone that just likes a good conversation, you know, I'm always being present with what wants to emerge. And even if I'm sitting in a meeting, hang on, I've just got to shut my door. The neighbors are getting active. Yes, even if I'm sitting in a meeting as a witness, there is this waiting for that feeling that something is not yet being represented and wanting to facilitate that, wanting to name that. And we'll see the 2 tenets in a minute, which will kind of capture that. So we and life are always coming into being all the time, everywhere. It's just a constant activity. Whether it's coming into being or fading away, there is still motion. So energy and consciousness matter. And I mean that in various ways, right? Things coming into being is another way of them mattering. But they matter because this is our experience. This is the process of us being here and this evolution of our consciousness. So the thing for us to be able to do is to become energy experts and to understand energy as information. And there are lots of ways that we do that, which we'll be visiting. But as you can see, you know, the community that is here, this extraordinary, beautiful community that is DSS, that is of the Bucky Fuller Institute, are just this kind of cornucopia of creators, designers, dreamers, artists, developers. Like, so the pragmatical, as I mentioned the other day, inspirers, empaths, highly sensitive people that have different ways of knowing and being. And to be here as part of this and to be able to support that emergence with this kind of information feels really good to me, and it feels important. So one of the things about dynamic emergence is that energy activity needs to be noticed, waits to be noticed in order to either alchemize itself or amplify itself. And this can be reflected back on in our human experience by things like when somebody names something that is in the room, or if you explain something to somebody about how you feel and they're able to mirror it back, that's energy being noticed. And then as soon as that's happened, there's this wonderful release and things become new again. I want to show you this because we talk about energy a lot, but this is actually, I believe it's electromagnetic filming. I'm not entirely sure what the technology was, but I go to Dows's conferences every other year. And so I was giving a sound healing. And I'm really hoping I've shared my sound. I think I did, but I want to double check. So hang on a sec.
Yep.
Did I? I did.
Yeah,
okay, cool. All right, so up front, the audio quality is not great, but what really matters is noticing the energy. So this lady, she paid for me to have this filmed, basically, and I came in to give her a sound healing. So this is her energy, bearing in mind, even though I'm off screen, I'm still close to her. So it's not just her energy. As you can see, it's slightly off to one side. And that might be, I've never thought about this before, in anticipation of me coming in, because that was the intention. So let's play it and see what happens. Notice the change in colours, obviously. The colours are open to your own interpretation. I don't have comment on that really, except I will make that observation that traditionally people consider the heart chakra to be green, and that can relate to healing. But there are so many ways to look at colour. I just like having something that says, yes, look, there is energy interacting. It's not just, it's not just a way of saying something, it's actual. So dynamic emergence, there are 2 tenets, and this was a download I got. I've been talking about this for a really long time. I've got videos that I can't even believe where I'm standing in a muddy field talking about this in festivals in England from years ago. But it came into a more formal kind of shape about 3 years ago. And I downloaded about 65 mind maps and was lucky enough to be able to film a whole series of videos to go with every single mind map for a series that people can study at their own pace or in a cohort on my website, dynamicemergence.net. So here are the 2 tenets. Tenet number 1, nothing is fixed. Now, that just sounds pretty straightforward, but the implications of that are extraordinary. If nothing is fixed, and one of the ways people might have experienced that with me through this these 11 days of RegenEraRising is through singing. So when I did some singing, I think people experienced something about their field being a little bit different. I know for sure I do. And I've done experiments with people where I ask them to think of a problem that they've got that won't leave them alone in that moment, something that's alive for them right now. And they write it down, and then I say, okay, so it's been documented, now just experience some sound, and then I'll sing. It doesn't have to be for long. And afterwards, I say, now can you go back and have a look at what you wrote and see what your relationship to it is now? And invariably, something has shifted. And the fact that we are not fixed and are able to be shifted by an environment, because we are an environment, right? And these environments interact. I think that's pretty interesting. One of the things that it made me think about when I thought more about it was you better think about who you're hanging out with, because the level of their consciousness, their conscious awareness, is going to have an impact on mine until I'm a master of my own energy field. So there's an influence happening. So if problems aren't fixed, that's pretty good news, right? It's a matter of how we come together in order to facilitate the emergence of novelty. And we do become different people in different people's company. A way of thinking about that is, I'll tell you a very short story, and you'll have a million of your own that you might start thinking about now, is that I used to teach creativity and innovation to management students at San Francisco State University. In the office hours, they very rarely came to talk about creativity. They usually wanted to talk about their grade and try and persuade me to increase it. But one day, a student came in who just wanted to talk about creativity. And so we were having this conversation, and it was wonderful. And then all of a sudden, out of absolutely nowhere, I heard myself say to him, you know, there's only so many ways to paint a horse. And then I looked at him, noticed what I had said, and then said, do you know what? I have absolutely no idea what that means. I've never said that before. I mean, I think I understand what it means, but I've never said it before. So I don't really know why I said it. And he looked at me and without hesitation said, my mother used to say that to me all the time growing up. So this information sharing, if energy is information and our fields are interacting, there is information traveling back and forth. And you'll notice things like your sense of humor will change, things that you feel willing to say, things that you don't feel willing to say, feeling cautious or feeling more buoyant in someone's company, finding yourself to be more funny, more amusing in someone's company, more delightful, right? All of that is in some sense, telling you something about the other person, because all of this stuff might be in us, but it's resonating with someone else and therefore emerging. And this is about waiting to be noticed, energy waiting to be noticed. Now, it's not that it's passive and just sitting there and, you know, doing nothing. But once it's noticed, an interaction occurs, like there is a mutuality. It's almost like the Ouroboros sees its own tail, and something can happen. When we pay attention, the it that is waiting to be noticed comes forward. It somehow feeds it a certain invitation, a certain kind of energy. By noticing that, it can, you know, if you think about it in terms of ideas coming forward, it can actually be how we listen for the wisdom of the future that inhabits the now, but it's not yet seen by us, to be able to present itself. We have to be open and willing to do that, because it's going to travel across a liminal threshold, and then it becomes available to us in our dimensions. We do that through our ways of knowing. And that is the implicate becoming explicate, the not seeable becoming seeable. It's liminal space. So some of the creative work I do is I paint energy balls, and this is one. And you can get the sense of energy, form, coming into being, and then off it goes. It's released. So what is a sensing environment? And it's basically understanding ourselves as energy moving, organizing itself, but with our help. So what kind of help are we giving it? Here are the ways of knowing as they're identified in dynamic emergence. And it's really an assimilation of the multiple intelligences that Howard Gardner talks about. It's what I used to use when I was teaching creativity and innovation. So there's rational, emotional, sensory, and then there's intuition. And all of that sits inside of this wonderful bubble of not knowing. So we have to have beginner's mind. If we're full, there's no room for something else to come in. So this collaboration between these ways of knowing is actually very important to how we meet information and how we interpret it and how we generate it. Each way of knowing has its own language, and it generates a corresponding way of being. So obviously rational is mental, of the mind, the mental mind, thinking. Emotional is to do with our emotional feeling, and sensory is to do with our ability to sense. So there's many ways to interpret sensing. A big part of that is the ability to have a tactile relationship to the sensitive energy in a situation or in an environment. It's a way to feel the non-locality of someone else's energy and consciousness. Now, each of us has a bias that's not fixed either, but we have a tendency, and you'll know this about yourself. You know, you might be someone that meets problems or invitations or new ideas with your mental thinking. You might meet it more emotionally, and you might meet it more with your body, with your gut, your instincts. So these experiences are influencing, again, how the potential of something that wants to come into being, how we are able to encounter it. And I'm going to add this because of Chris. I added this in while Chris was talking. I mean, it existed, but I wasn't going to go there, but now I am. So inversion theory. Inversion theory is something that I actually needed to hear because I wanted to understand why such a beautifully designed system, right, a human being, and I don't say this above any other species, but I am talking specifically about humans right now, because humans are designed with this extraordinary capacity to feel and connect with multiple dimensions simultaneously and to understand those dimensions simultaneously, even if they contradict one another. There is this thing called inversion theory, which explains why such intelligence can actually sabotage itself. I wanted to know. It didn't make sense to me, and I like to understand things. I come from an artist family, but I come from an engineering family. I'm very pragmatic people that like to understand things. So I have multiple influences. So here's the statement, which you may have already read by now. When one way of knowing becomes isolated, whether it's the rational, the emotional, or the sensory, and is no longer informed, no longer in communion with the other two, at its most extreme, it will become the inverse of itself. It will become the inverse of itself. As I mentioned here, if it leads to anger that is not met, heard, or healed, then we all suffer. So right now I'm suddenly thinking of Putin and Ukraine, but it could be anything, and it could be on any scale. In that case, we behave in ways that do not make sense to a systemic perception of life, how life works systemically. Each way of being and each way of knowing has its own language, its own sensitivity, and its own territory. So you can see from this is just the general map, and I'm not going to go massively into it. I just want you to see it, really, so that you can see the thinking. So all of this is kind of inside this blue area, which is called inner res, rational, emotional, sensory. This is kind of private territory, and this is where who I am kind of comes into being inside myself before I decide what to reveal to the outside world. So I'm taking in information and I'm doing something with it. And then I will express it out into the world. And this, the outer res, is where you're doing that too. And it's where you and I get to meet and have some kind of interaction. All of that is sitting inside this orange band, which is called the creative collective or collective consciousness. I like calling it the creative collective, but it's actually collective consciousness, really. Same thing. But you'll see in a minute, because of what I'm about to show you, that this is not fixed. It looks fixed, but it's not fixed ever, just like you saw in that healing energy video. So how we come and meet one another, how we make room for the possibilities that might occur between us, whether it's with hostility or love, affects our ability to expand this consciousness. As we do that, we can then feel into the planet. The planet is our home. And that's why we are sitting inside the planet. The planet needs a home too, and that's the cosmos. This area of the not knowing of the arjuna is where intuition and imagination allow us to travel into these outer realms. So who and what are we collaborating with? So I'm sort of touched on that. I have no idea what the time is, so I better keep moving a bit faster. Briefly, I just want to show you this. This is a one-on-one. So let's say that's me and that's you. And then this is us having an interaction. Let's imagine we're having an amazing interaction and we see that field expand. And maybe we're not having an amazing interaction, so we'll see it contract again. And it can be as simple as someone mishearing you or not quite getting something you're trying to communicate. Now that's just one-on-one. This happens in groups. So here, this is that creative collective expanding. So obviously we're having a good time. That's RegenEra right now, having a good time. That's, let's say that's at rest. And this is if something's going wrong and everything contracts, which means the creative possibilities can also get a little bit lost. So how do we evolve our consciousness? Through all of the interactions, by noticing all of the interactions that we're having, whether they're pleasant or unpleasant, just noticing the experience. Then using the imagination, our intuition, these are those guys, as I mentioned, to other ways of knowing, more expansive, more regenerative, more sustainable ways of knowing and being and designing from those places. We can actually observe the feedback loops of the universe that's talking to us through our bodies, through our minds, and through our hearts. That is the collaboration. And imagination is a beautiful word, 3 words in one. Magi, the root of that is magician, alchemist, sorcerer, or astronomer. Hence, I'm adding in the C. So when I'm using my imagination, I'm actually transforming a reality, whether it's this environment or a larger environment with permission. This I'll just share with people as an available slide, but have a quick look at how this shows up in our daily lives. So, for instance, the universe seems to work with us to manifest whatever we actually believe, which might be different from what we think we believe. We only need to look at the evidence of our lives to see where we might have some sticky areas that could do with some attention, some noticing. Our perception drives the energy that's flowing, and it drives it in certain ways with certain temperatures, if you will. We can't actually escape what we generate because that's like a goldfish escaping the goldfish bowl or a fish escaping the water. What else can we see? The knowing bias influences our way of understanding. This I think is very important. Our evolution is the evolution. And from that, my understanding is that we cannot actually evolve an external future without evolving this internal present. So there is a direct interlocking relationship there that I can't bypass. And I know we have that term spiritual bypass or emotional bypass. and it doesn't work. And I think we've probably, between us, tried it. I mean, why not try it, right? So anyway, not a reliable thing to do. So what affects the reach of our imagination? Self-confidence, faith, and trust. What affects the reach of our imagination? Self-confidence, faith, and trust. These are much bigger than they sound. And I want to point this out. It takes incredible courage to believe in yourself, to believe in oneself, when our own culture does not nurture that which lives in us as our true soul signature, as our true soul destination. Again, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this. These are available on the website. But the beliefs go in, out and out. They influence. In here, you become the storyteller. You're the center of everything. You, each of us, is the center of everything here, always. So we have this incredible responsibility and opportunity to have, and Bucky, I love how he talks about this idea that really once you're in the center of your life, your true life, it is not the same ever again, that something feels totally different. And I'm still on that journey myself. I move toward it and I feel the expanding self into the larger self. But I'm still a human, so I still have my own relationship to my own evolution, but I'm on it. And I hope you are too. I think you are. So the belief systems, as it says here, they sort of become a kind of filter for which thoughts, because if you think of thoughts as having frequency, which ones can come in to our awareness if we're not able to establish kind of a landing pad within ourselves for them. So I think maybe they just kind of have to swoop over the top of us. And there's probably a better way of saying that. But I think this thing about our belief systems needs to be taken really seriously because it can really upend things. And as I mentioned, our external environment is very key to that. So if we're in environments where, especially, if you grew up in an environment where things that were natural for you to believe were negated, even if they weren't directly negated toward you, that is an image that you take in, and then it can have an influence on you until you notice it, which is that second tenet. So the answers, our answers, are found in our ability to travel. And by travel, I mean interdimensionally. Humans, the mainstream thinking pods, they need some help in accessing the numinous, where the greater wisdom is. And the numinous, for me, is another way of saying that, is the void. It's the place where possibilities and opportunity are waiting to present themselves as a collaborative force. So all of us here as artists and innovators, we have something to do with that. We are, in fact, travelers. There is a different vibrational language that's more inclusive, and it means that we can travel between these realms to be in that cosmic conversation. So the rewards for paying attention are, I haven't even experienced them in a full sense yet. Like I've had feelings of it, and I've had moments, and I do have moments, and I'm grateful for those. But we are, in fact, the new language makers. And I would say, please don't ever underestimate, given the cultures that a lot of us have grown up in, don't underestimate the skill and the courage it takes to be willing to ride the tail of the dragon. And here's what I mean by that. Dragons, one of the ways they are considered in terms of their symbolism is creativity. So when the dragon was slayed, I don't know exactly when that happened in terms of the time frame that story became, but I'm curious about how it relates to the Industrial Revolution, because there is something about killing our creativity that has sort of perhaps entrapped our memory of who we are, because that model kind of makes me think of the burning of the witches, the Enlightenment. It's such an ironic term. So there's that. But here's the other thing. Dragons are so powerful. They're so powerful. And I think that's something for us to remember, is that no matter how much we might doubt ourselves or feel vulnerable or feel unsure of things, inside any artist is a dragon waiting to voice its truth. And I believe this is the very last slide. And I really like this one. So I think of creativity, I think of the things that draw us forward as teleological. And in a way, the way I interpret what that means is that there is a future me, or there is me in the future, simultaneous to me being right here, right now, talking to you, and perhaps me from the past. Perhaps we're all here. How does one separate, right? And that there is a knowledge of a future that something in me knows is there. I can sniff it in the air, right? It's that sensory intelligence, that intuition as well. And it's pulling me forward. And that is the way I get sort of forced to evolve, because anything that obstructs this compulsion, this passionate drive to fulfill a sense of purpose, a particular purpose, that energy is what will push me through all the bits that I might not want to go through in terms of what do I see in myself? What do I see in humanity? How do I deal with the pain of disappointment and grief and loss? So a lot of people look at this and they think this is them, the shell, and that the pearl is their project. And what I'd like to propose is that this is your life, and that this is in fact you. And the project is the element of your life that knows you so well that it can't wait to have you join it in this becoming future. Think about that. So the striving can be seen as a striving toward ourselves, as a striving toward completion in a way, which doesn't mean death, doesn't mean the end. It just means some kind of restoration of self to self. And I think maybe that's what we're all doing here. That's one way of looking at it. And it doesn't have to be the only thing that's true, if it is true indeed. So I have no idea how I was on time, but I hope there's enough time.